Russian Tale. A New Light on an Empress. By Rosalind Salkas. Catherine the Great, an Enlightened Empress. National Museum of Scotland, Edinburgh, www.nms.ac.uk. Through October 21st. Online, more and art. A guide to museum exhibitions around the world is at global.nytimes.com/arts. Culture. Early on in the exhibition, Catherine the Great, an Enlightened Empress. Now running at the National Museum of Scotland, the viewer comes across a portrait of the newly crowned ruler of Russia. Catherine, standing on the purple porphyry stone associated with past rulers, is sumptuously gowned in a silvery silk dress so wide that it fills the huge canvas. A beveled crown rests upon her head and she holds a scepter in her right hand. Her gaze, looking down upon us, is calmly resolute. The iconography is perfectly clear. Here is the country's rightful queen, entirely sure of her place on the throne. The reality, as we learn at the start of this exhibition, was very different. The Empress of all Russia, whose 34-year reign turned the country into a global power, and opened St. Petersburg to the west, was not Russian at all. Born Sophie Frederica Augusta of Anhalt-Zerbst, she was a minor German princess who was brought to Moscow at 14 to marry the teenage Grand Duke Peter. How she became the Russian-speaking, Russia-loving ruler who would dominate European politics for decades is the stuff of biographers' dreams. But it is not exactly the subject of An Enlightened Empress, which offers the facts of Sophie's journey to Russia, her rechristening as Catherine after conversion to Orthodox Christianity, and her application to her new country's language and history as a mere preamble to a sumptuous display of some 600 artworks and objects from Catherine's collections, all on loan from the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. Instead, it is a vivid portrait of a ruler as seen through these objects, which the National Museum describes as the greatest collection of Russian treasures ever seen in the UK. The breathtaking pieces of porcelain, tapestries, silver and furniture, the guns, ornaments, snuff boxes, scent bottles, jewelry, the cameos, sculptures and paintings, all are manifestations of Catherine's desire for Russia to be seen as a cultural and political power equal to any in the West, and they show her passions for art, architecture, design and literature is quite equal to, indeed a crucial part of, her appetites for warfare, sex and empire building. The generous loan from the Hermitage comes just 4 years after the Kremlin ordered British Council regional offices to be closed down in Russia, a demand widely seen as a riposte to Britain's expulsion of Russian diplomats after the murder of the British-based Russian dissident Alexander Litvinenko. Although Britain ignored the order, diplomatic relations stayed frosty. But the presence of Catherine in Edinburgh, alongside exhibitions of Henry Moore, Anthony Gormley and William Blake in Russia this year, seem to indicate a cultural détente. An Enlightened Empress is also the fruit of a surprisingly close relationship that the National Museum of Scotland has built with the Hermitage over the past decade, starting with The Last Tsar and Tsarina, a 2005 exhibition about Nicholas and Alexandra, and continuing with the 2006 Beyond the Palace Walls, an exhibition of Islamic art. There has always been a strong Scottish-Russian relationship, said Maureen Barry, one of the curators of the exhibition. Edinburgh was twinned with St. Petersburg for a while in the 1990s, and we have always had a great deal of support from the Russian consulate here. When we first discussed collaboration for Nicholas and Alexandra, almost 10 years ago, with the Hermitage, we hit it off on ideas about design and display. Since then, we have always been given an amazing amount of freedom in choosing what we need. Miss Barry said that the museum had wanted to have a major exhibition after the extensive renovations that kept its doors closed from 2008 to 2011. Because of the relationship with the Hermitage, she and Godfrey Evans, her co-curator, considered a number of possible subjects, including Peter the Great. And we realized it would be the 250th anniversary of Catherine's accession, and the Russians weren't doing anything, she said. Single quote, "We wanted to dispel the myths about her. The political cartoons of the day paraded and made fun of her. All sorts of scandalous myths have grown up around her. But she was essentially a clever and astute woman, who valued the history and culture of Russia, and was determined to bring improvement to the country. As the enlightened bit of the title of the exhibition suggests, Miss Barry and Dr. Evans have kept the focus determinedly positive. At the outset there is no real explanation of her role in the coup d'etat that brought her to power, nor any hint of her possible role in Peter's eventual murder. There is minimal allusion to her lovers, and no reference to the considerable spilling of blood involved in the rapid land grabbing that saw Russia annex the Crimea, Poland and other territories. Instead, an enlightened Empress puts the spotlight on Catherine's friendships with philosophers and writers like Diderot, Rousseau and Voltaire, her 40,000-volume library, her rebuilding of St. Petersburg as a neoclassical city, her writing of tracts and her astounding collections of all things beautiful. Her palaces, their architecture and what was inside them were part of her understanding of how to communicate power and prestige, said Miss Barry. Single quote she wanted people to say, Versailles has nothing on this. Both Dr. Evans and Miss Barry said that the real difficulty in putting the exhibition together was deciding what to leave out. The Hermitage doesn't display Catherine's collections like we do, said Dr. Evans. We tend to think in departmental terms, and don't make maximum use of bringing it all together. Our display, set out in a thematic and chronological way, is a first for her belongings. The easiest way to look at items is if you have a good story. The exhibition gives us that story, first offering the religious icons and vestments, and the portraits and busts of the Empress Elizabeth, Peter's mother, and Peter the Great, the influences that turned the German Sophie into the Russian Catherine. After taking the throne, her acquisitions are astounding. Porcelain aficionados will marvel at examples from the 744-piece turquoise and gold Sevres cameo service that Catherine gave to her lover Count Potemkin in 1776. It took 24 years to pay off. Count Potemkin gave Catherine an Angora cat in return, and from the Green Frog Wedgwood service, decorated with 1,222 views of Britain. Catherine's encouragement of Russian skills and industry, often brought about through importing foreign craftsmen, is also apparent. There are gorgeous examples of the elaborately crafted steel furniture made at the Tula factory, tapestries and the vases and obelisks that were created from the newly discovered minerals of agate, quartz and carnelian. There are the elaborate clothes and uniforms worn by Catherine, her children and grandchildren, and a spectacular wooden sledge in the form of St. George on a horse slaying the dragon. There is also no stone left unturned when it comes to the Russo-Scottish entente cordiale, with a strong emphasis on the role that Scots played at court, particularly Charles Cameron, the architect of the Tsarskoye Selo and Pavlovsk palaces, and in the army, and a Highland outfit on display that was probably bought by the future Tsar Nicholas I. Perhaps least interesting is the relatively small selection of paintings from Catherine's vast collection in the final gallery. Rather, what remains in the mind is that coronation portrait, attributed to a Danish court painter, Vigilius Eriksson, at the start of the show. In the lavish artificiality of its setting, this image of Catherine suggests the essential enigma of her personality, and her understanding of her rule as a form of theatrical show. Catherine the Great, an enlightened empress, lovingly sets the stage,